How do you free your voice and go out there and perform in a relaxed and confident way? Hi, I'm Hattie Volker from Find Your True Voice, and you're listening to the Courageous Performer podcast. And that is exactly what I'm going to be talking about today, because this is a podcast designed to help you feel comfortable and confident in front of any audience. Now, there are 5 steps that I can teach you that will really help you let go and free your voice when you're performing. And I call these 5 steps my free your voice process. You can see the logic there. And excitingly, I have some exciting news for you. Next week, I'm running my 5-day challenge in which I will teach you in depth those 5 steps in a combination of tasks and live trainings, all completely for free. But in this episode, I'm going to set out those 5 steps so that you have a good idea of what I'm talking about. In the meantime, if you want to register for the challenge, then simply go to findyourtruevoice.co.uk/5DC. That's 5 the number DC. And you'll see there how to register. And at the end of this episode, I will tell you exactly what the challenge involves and what registration will give you. Let me tell you about the 5 steps first. Step 1 is to set down what you are performing and the reason you're performing it, to whom you are performing it, and where you are performing it. Now, I know that sounds really ridiculously simple, but you will be surprised at how many people skip this step and the impact it has if you skip this step. Because we often skip this step because we think we know what we're performing, the reason, to whom we're performing it, and where we're performing it. Or it can also be partly because we don't want to think about it. But if you don't have those things set out, it can really impact how you prepare. So that's step number 1. Step number 2 is really looking at what you are performing and the reason you're performing it. Now, this is where it gets really juicy in the 5-day challenge, because we dig into this and people tell me about what they're performing. We start to unpick how your thoughts about what you're performing can really impact how you perform it, your understanding of what you're performing and the reason you're performing it. But for the purposes of this episode, I want you just to think, what are you performing? What is the message involved in it? And what's the reason you're performing it? And that can sometimes be the knotty thing, because you might on the surface of it know the reason you're performing it. It's an audition. Your boss has told you that you have to give this presentation. On the face of it, that seems really straightforward. But there will always be a deeper motive that actually connects with you more. And when you start to dig in and unpick that, it can really transform how you perform. Step number 3, who are you performing this to? Again, it might seem really, really obvious. I know who I'm performing it to. I'm performing it to an audition panel. I'm performing it to my colleagues at work. But what you'll realize as you start to unpick this is what we're talking about is who are the humans you are performing it to? Because we might be able to categorize them. But then by categorizing them, putting them in boxes, we lose who they really are. And that makes it much harder to connect with them. When I pick this apart in the challenge, this is quite often the part where the biggest revelations are had, the biggest transformations occur when you start to shift your perspective about who your audience is and what you want to give them. Step number 4 is probably the most challenging step of all, and it's why most people come and work with me in the first place, to deal with your fears. Step number 4 is, what is your greatest fear? What is your biggest worry about performing? And this is generally where any lack of freedom in your performance stems from. When we go through this in the 5-day challenge, it's amazing what comes up. And it's also amazing the benefit people get from hearing what other people say are their biggest fears. And this is where actually the challenge is brilliant, because there is an interactive part of it because of the live trainings, and also there are interactions online as well, if you choose to, where you get to hear what other people are talking about, and you'll get to hear my responses to that. Because when you start to hear other people say what's in your head and actually have similar fears to you, it can instantly start to lessen your fears because it can start to normalize them. And when they start to lessen, it becomes so much easier to let them go. So really being part of that process with other people involved makes a huge difference. Step number 5, and as somebody who is really almost certain to have ADHD, this is one of the ones that I find hardest, and this is one of the ones I skip most often. The steps I tend to skip most often are steps number 1, really setting out and knowing what I'm performing, to who I'm performing it, and where I'm performing it. And step number 5, building a plan. In the challenge, by the end of the challenge, we will build a plan together. So you have a plan of action for every performance that you can apply to every sort of performance you do. What I do know is if I don't plan, things definitely go worse. If I don't do this plan, because there are various ways of planning, and some ways of planning can actually make things worse. You can over prepare, you can try and control, and then the performance will become stilted and you're more likely actually to make a mistake, or worse than that, not manage when things go awry, because things quite often go awry. And if you're really rigid in your structure of your plan, then it's really hard to respond when things go differently. When you have a plan, a number of things happen. Number 1, it can instantly calm you. Again, if you have the right sort of plan, but it can can give you this sense of calm because you know what you're doing. Number 2, it means you will have ticked off all of the things that all of the steps that we've talked about here that help you put yourself in a headspace where you can be freer and more comfortable performing. You will make sure that you cover your bases. And number 3, it gives you a sense of agency, and this adds to this sense of calm that you can get, because so often a lot of the nerves come out of the fact that we don't feel in control. When you go out to perform, you don't know what's going to happen. No matter how much you've prepared, things can go awry. But if you have this plan, you have a sense of agency. You also, within that plan, are tools that you can use to help you as and when things do go slightly off track. And that again has this calming feeling, because if you understand and believe that you will cope if things don't go to plan, then you are much more empowered when you're in the space, and the nerves can lessen instantly. So that's a rough outline of the 5 steps. 1, set out what you're performing, who you're performing it to, and where you're performing it. Step 2, take a closer look at what you're performing and the reason you're performing it, what you're presenting, what you're singing, what you're dancing, whatever it is. Step number 3, reperspective your audience. Take a different look at your audience. Step number 4, let's take a look at those fears that you have been avoiding looking at and see how unpicking them, especially when you do it with other people. So have a conversation. If you can't make the challenge, go find somebody else who performs and talk to them about their fears. You'll be surprised how much it will ease your own fears if you do that. Step number 5 is build a plan. Build a plan so that you know what you plan to do just before you go on stage. You know what to prep, how to prep, and what mindset, and how to get yourself into that mindset just before you perform. As I said, in the 5-day challenge, which starts on the 30th of September and runs to the 4th of October, I will be setting out these tasks in detail. And if you register, what you get is you get a link to the tasks, these detailed tasks. They're very short. You can spend as much or as little time on them as you want. You can do them really quickly, but obviously the longer you spend, the more you'll get out of it. You have all day to do the task. And then in the afternoon, evening, there is a live Zoom training with me. So if you register, you get the link to the Zoom training. And I will spend time digging into these tasks. You will also get the chance to comment on Instagram and TikTok about the tasks, and I will respond. So if you're having any challenges with the task, you can just put a question on social media about it and I will respond to you there if that's what you want to do, or you can join the live training. And again, if you register, you'll get access to a recording of the live training so that if you miss it, you can catch up. So that's the 5-day challenge. To recap on the 5 tasks, it's what are you doing, to whom, and where? Digging in, really understanding what you are wanting to present in the message, understanding who you're performing it to, understanding your fears and making a plan. Now you can do that all by yourself. But if you want some support, then register for the 5-day challenge at findyourtruevoice.co.uk/5-day challenge 5DC, and that's the number 5DC. And come and join us next week, where we really dig into this process that I call your Free Your Voice process, because that's exactly what it does. I'm Hattie Volker from Find Your True Voice, and you've been listening to the Courageous Performer podcast. See you very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.